I'd like to welcome everybody to AMS on the Air for the AMS 2020 annual meeting, which is an important one for us because it's the 100th annual meeting. And although we're not that old, we're definitely feeling the past, the present, and the future all in one meeting. That's part of the theme of the meeting. And of course, the other part of the theme is linking knowledge to information to society. And I can't think of anything that links knowledge to society better than education. And I can't think of anything better that passes on the past to the future than education. So it's pretty appropriate that our very first guest on our live podcast this week is John Knox, who is the 2020 Lorenz Award winner for outstanding and creative approaches to teaching and commitment to lifelong learning, and just an all-around good guy. John, welcome on AMS on the Air.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's great to talk to you. Of course, you're also an editor for AMS, which is near and dear to my heart. But yesterday, you kicked off the 2020 Student Conference as well, which is bringing a lot of people here. You're a faculty advisor, chair? What's the role?
Co-chair. Faculty co-chair. The students do the work, and I just stand back and watch them do it.
Well, that's a great lesson to all of us to start with. And okay, so the big question I have is, you had a presentation yesterday in which you talked about, or as the award winner this year from the Lorenz Award, that's an annual feature of the Student Conference, and I want to understand, how is it exactly that you failed your way to such great success?
That's right. The title of my talk was Failing My Way to the Lorenz Award, and that was an intentional pitch that I wanted to make to the students, because when you hear an award winner speak, usually you feel like they're much better than you could ever be, and that they never ran into any problems. And so I talked to the student co-chairs, and I said, I don't want to get up there and do the brag thing or the humble brag thing. I want to tell them the truth, really, about my experiences. And so what I did was I led them through all the different things that I, quote, messed up on in terms of being like everybody else, following the path or the way to success. And yet, even though I didn't do any of those things, I ended up on stage talking to them as an award winner.
So what would you say was the most important failure of your life so far in terms of becoming a good teacher?
In terms of being a good teacher, my most important failing was not focusing solely on research and doing teaching only as an afterthought. I think even professors that do see themselves as teachers, they're only part-time teachers, but the problem with that is that students need people that they can come to all the time. And so I have prioritized students, student letters of recommendation, having students in my office crying about situations in my entire career. And that's not what you're supposed to do if you're supposed to be a productive scientist, and I decided I don't care. I'm for the students.
How does that manifest itself in terms of your own research? It seems like you've done a lot of work looking into how to be a better teacher.
If I want to serve the students right, I have to constantly try to be a better teacher. And so what I've done since I was a graduate student, which again is another thing you're supposed to delay, work on research as a graduate student. But even as a graduate student, I worked on research on becoming a better teacher and developing my own philosophy of how to teach. And so that's really been part of the overall picture, is that from the get-go, I was dedicated to being a teacher first, honestly.
Now, how did that go as a grad student? Did that start to get ugly with your advisor right away? Or
No, not so much, but I did make choices that seemed unusual at the time. I went to graduate school on a research fellowship, on an NSF fellowship, but I also was a teaching assistant for two different classes. From one class, a textbook emerged ultimately from that with Steve Ackerman at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So it took me longer than most people to finish a PhD, but I had a lot of forward momentum both in research and in teaching from that experience.
Can I ask you a little bit about how you got to be interested in meteorology?
Yes.
I guess you started out I read you had a math degree as an undergrad. Was that right?
That's right. But before that, I was a 4-year-old at a baseball game when a tornado, a funnel cloud actually, went overhead of the stadium and blew chairs off the stadium and zapped the transformer, and all the lights went out. So at the age of 4, I had my fundamental severe weather experience, which is so common for people in our field. And then at the age of 5, the next year, my aunt sent me a book about the weather, and I announced to my bemused family that I would be a meteorologist. We didn't know if we had any other scientists in the family, so I just declared then and there that I would be a meteorologist. Later on, though, I decided to go to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, for a degree in mathematics, partly because we didn't have a lot of money, and I got the best scholarship offer there, and it turned out to be a great interdisciplinary education experience at UAB. So again, not the linear path, but as I tell people, if you follow what everybody else is supposed to do in life and you check all the boxes like everybody else, what really happens is you have a very short funeral because you're just like everybody else, and there's nothing to say about you except the generics. So I've learned in my study of history, including the biographies of meteorologists, that often they've made unusual choices and done unusual things, and that's actually what made them memorable and made their work unique.
So in becoming a better teacher, do you feel like that's continued? Like you make choices in how you teach that are unique?
Yes.
And different. And what are some of the things that you've done that you feel are bearing fruit, so to speak, in that way?
Almost 20 years ago, I decided to try to teach dynamics a different way. The second dynamics class is often a class that focuses on the heavy mathematics, which is not anything I disagree with. I'm a math major at heart. But its applicability was always a little bit in question. People would say, so I've done all this instability theory, where is this really getting me? Meanwhile, that was when, in the 90s and early 2000s, when data assimilation started becoming very much an important subject in meteorology and in weather forecasting, and yet it didn't seem to have a good place anywhere in the curriculum because our synoptic curricula typically come from an older time. And so what I decided to do was to revamp my dynamics class to be focused on data assimilation and to teach dynamics through the history of data assimilation, because the first part of it is very much dynamics heavy. The quest for the perfect balance, as it were, for data assimilation. And the second part of it is statistical. And so I created a data assimilation class that would use the history to educate with regard to wave theory and geostrophic adjustment and things like that, and then show the students where it went from there, which also gives a nice arc of how science is nonlinear, because it seemed to everyone at the time, from Jules Charney forward, that this was really a problem in atmospheric dynamics, and it has become a problem with some dynamics, but also with lots of statistical approaches. So I chose to do that not just because I thought it was a good idea, but also because I thought students in atmospheric science nationally were being ill-served because we weren't really teaching them the good stuff, the hot stuff, and instead, and you can find citations for this, we would hire applied mathematicians or physicists at the PhD level. And I thought that was a wrong way to go about it. Our students should be hearing what's hot in our field, and they should be hearing it at the undergraduate level, since it directly intersects with why we have better forecasts.
So on the one hand, you also took that course and you made a story out of it.
That's
seems
right.
like, and so by making history into the story, or beyond that, the narrative structure of the course, did that work? Did you feel like that really?
I think so.
Cemented it in people's minds?
Especially for undergraduates, I think we have to appreciate the fact that narrative matters for a lot of them, and that if it's just one equation after another, or one derivation after another of the same equation in different coordinate systems, that you emerge having kind of jumped the hoops, but you don't know why you did any of it. And I try to come back time and again in my classes to the why. Why are we studying this? Why does this matter? Why does it matter for you? How might you use this in your future career? And so for me, storytelling is a very important part of that. Analogies are important. And so I implement a lot of those, and I do more of it as the material gets harder. So data assimilation has a lot of mathematics around it and a lot of unfamiliar concepts. And so I try to implement analogies and stories to make that make sense for the student.
And then you boil the stories down to limericks, right? That's
well,
the next.
That's right.
That's your presentation, by the way. What, Wednesday? One of your presentations?
No, it's coming. It's coming up soon. It's coming up Monday.
Monday? Okay.
And so
Monday.
on Monday, I thought if I'm going to be getting a teaching award, somebody should see some of the crazy stuff I do in classes. And if you take one of my classes, including a dynamics class, there may be poetry involved. You may intersect with a little bit of literature here and there. And so I'll be giving a talk on taking poetic license with atmospheric dynamics. Now, the limericks are actually by a different dynamicist, not me, Peter Lynch, an Irish meteorologist, who basically was able to distill the history of numerical weather prediction with a dynamics touch in about 6 limericks. And so we'll be going over those in my presentation, and if time permits, we may even be singing around in the room. That has to do with the Rossby
time
number.
to do it now, or
I don't think so. We don't have enough people to do around here, but it's coming. So you just have to come to the talk, and that's one of the things I've emphasized as well, is trying to give presentations at the Education Symposium at the AMS that really do show university initiatives.
Yeah, the teaching is not just a pre-college thing, which we're very strong in. Yeah,
we've been great on that, but when I was first coming to these meetings in the 1990s, there wasn't as much energy at the university level, and I think we've helped to change that.
What are your colleagues doing, or what can they do, the ones who are teaching intro courses or any course really, to strengthen their own teaching like that?
It's a different path for everybody, because I'm a particular kind of personality, and certain things work with me and certain things don't. For example, I walk to my class in a bathrobe when I'm teaching about the adiabatic lapse rates, the dry and the wet. And so that's probably not for everybody. That's a bit of the showman approach, but I'm happy to do that, to wake up a bored English major on a Monday morning. I think for me, what I try to do is focus on who is my audience, and that's advice we give to our science communicators, but of course teaching is science communication. Who is the audience? What are they interested in? How can we take what we know we want to convey, which we think is essential, how can we make that matter to them? And so that's a different philosophy than thinking I've got a body of material that I have to inject into the students, which is called, in one book I read, the inoculation theory of education.
Painful.
Exactly. Well, it's painful. You stick it in, and then they don't have to do it again. And so the first big class I ever taught in my life, first class of about 200 students, I said to them, I've been told that you're supposed to hate this class and I'm supposed to hate this class, and we're just supposed to make it through it. I said, well, I'm going to pretend that this is a smaller class where I can get to know everybody, and I want you to pretend that this is a class that you don't actively hate as the only science class you ever have to take, or only physical science class. And the students at the University of Georgia really responded favorably. I'm still in touch with some of those students almost 20 years later. And so that's my advice to teachers, is to do a meld, do an assimilation process, as it were, between what they're thinking, oh, I need to cover this material, versus what is it that the students care about, and can we find a way to make both of those work? And then go with it as your personality and interests fit.
So you talked about what are the hot topics and trying to make sure you're teaching those. And at the same time, you wrote an article a long time ago, at this point, I guess, about what do students want to learn.
That's right.
And so where do you see that meeting? Where do those roads meet coming in the next decade or so, in terms of what are the hot topics and how do they serve what students want out of the classes?
Thanks for bringing that up, because in the mid-2000s, Steve Ackerman and I did write an article in BAMS about what students wanted to learn. And what we did was we took our normal first day of class, what are you interested in sorts of things. I do it on a 3x5 card and so forth. And so we had two different samples, one from Georgia, one from the University of Wisconsin, of what students were interested in on day one of taking an intro to weather and climate or meteorology class. And if you asked other teachers, they would usually say, oh, they just want to know about tornadoes. But that's not what we found. What we found was there was interest, at least some, pretty much across the entire spectrum of what we think of as the material we're supposed to cover in an intro to weather and climate class. And so that was heartening. It was also interesting that there was a lot more interest in climate change in Wisconsin than in Georgia, and I think we know why if we look at maps of temperature changes. Wisconsin, by the mid-2000s, was starting to see changes. Well, flash forward another 15 years, and I see a lot more students at the University of Georgia that are passionately interested in climate change, communication of climate change, and so I think we've moved even closer to a place where the full spectrum of interests of what you would cover in an intro class has student interest somewhere along the line. And so I keep daring to just walk into a class with a blank syllabus and say, all right, let's just do this class. Let's fill in our syllabus based on what you're interested in. I never quite do it, but as I get older, I get more rascalier. So I'll probably do it in another couple of years because I think we're there. Students have seen a lot of what isn't just traditional meteorology. They're interested in forecasts, definitely interested in severe weather, but there's been so much coverage of climate change and other non-traditional pure meteorology subjects that we've achieved it, I think.
This sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time and for being on the air and AMS on the air. And
Great.
Good luck at the conference. Enjoy it. And we'll be interested to hear your ideas on teaching in the future, I'm sure. So,
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and I hope people walk up and say hi and ask me about the limericks.
Fair enough. And sing.
That's right.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.